প্ৰিয় শিক্ষাৰ্থীসকল, কৃষ্ণকান্ত সন্দিকৈ ৰাজ্যিক মুক্ত বিশ্ববিদ্যালয়ৰ বিদ্যায়তনিক দৃশ্য শ্ৰাব্য অনুষ্ঠানটিলৈ আপোনালোকক স্বাগতম জনাইছো। স্বয়ং প্ৰভা DTH চেনেল 20ৰ যোগেদি শিক্ষাৰ্থীসকলৰ অধ্যয়ন কাৰ্য অধিক মনোগ্ৰাহী আৰু ফলপ্ৰসূ হোৱালৈ লক্ষ্য ৰাখি বিভিন্ন বিষয় সামৰি আমাৰ এই বিদ্যায়তনিক অনুষ্ঠানটি সজোৱা হৈছে। আহকচোন প্ৰিয় দৰ্শকসকল, আমাৰ আজিৰ খণ্ডটিৰ মাজলৈ আগবাঢ়ো।
Hello dear learners, welcome to today's program. I am Dr. Pallavi Gogoi of Krishnakanta Handicap State Open University. Today I shall take up Unit-6 titled DH Lawrence, and the poem prescribed for you is Snake. Here we shall discuss life and works of the poet in this particular video, that is. So let us quickly begin. The unit is taken from the course General English Semester 1 Block 1. First, I shall begin with the table of contents, where I shall be discussing the learning objectives, introduction, followed by a little bit about DH Lawrence, the poet, and the life of DH Lawrence, as well as the literary works of DH Lawrence. Then we shall come to the questions to check your progress, followed by references. Coming to the learning objectives. After going through this video, the learner will be able to gain an insight into the life of the poet DH Lawrence and also discuss the literary works of the poet. To provide you with a brief introduction, the present unit introduces the learner to the remarkable 20th century English novelist DH Lawrence. DH Lawrence is better known as an English novelist, although he excelled in all forms of writings, as is also evident in the wide range and extent of his literary contributions. As a writer, Lawrence was a perfectionist when it came to revising and editing his works for publication. Moreover, he was also an excellent painter who held a lifelong passion for oil painting. Despite the widespread literary criticism and political controversies that Lawrence had confronted during his writing career, eventually his literary worth and credibility had received its due share of recognition, as also highly noted by writers like A.M. Forster and F.R. Lewis. Now, we shall discuss a little bit about the poet D.H. Lawrence. Prior to starting out as a writer, Lawrence wrote poetry, and his first poems had been published in the English Review titled Dreams Old and Dreams Nascent. Altogether, his poetical output comprised a total of around 800 poems. The range of his literary work includes novels, novellas, short stories, essays, poems, plays, and travel narratives as well. To discuss a little bit about the life of D.H. Lawrence, Derek Herbert Richards Lawrence. Yes, that's the full name of the writer. Derek Herbert Richards Lawrence was born to Arthur John Lawrence and Lydia Birdsall in a humble working-class family. He was brought up in the mining town of Eastwood, Nottinghamshire, where his father had served as a coal miner. You can well imagine how difficult and challenging is the life of coal miners who work and extract coal in the gloomy underground tunnels. Thus, the Lawrence family had to work hard in order to meet their needs. As a young boy, Lawrence had seen much trouble in the early part of his life, fragments of which are captured in the best of his literary works. He had received his early education at the Beauville Board School and the Nottingham High School on scholarship. Although he was not really inclined towards studies, his mother had inculcated in him a lifelong love of books, music, and literature. After having finished his school education, Lawrence had briefly worked at the Hayward's surgical appliances factory and then joined the British school Eastwood as a pupil teacher. In due course of time, Lawrence went to receive a teaching certificate from the University College of Nottingham. With the sprouting of his literary abilities, he had begun to write and publish some of his early works, which comprised poems, short stories, and fiction. As a young man who had only started his writing pursuits, Lawrence suffered a huge setback in life when he had lost his mother, with whom he had shared a special bonding. After the publication of his second novel, he had suffered a second bout of pneumonia, but had very soon decided to give up teaching in order to pursue his passion for writing. During this phase of his life, he had also eloped with Frida Weekly, who had 3 children from her first marriage. to Germany. So they had eloped to Germany, where the couple had married later in 1914. Together, they had travelled and spent considerable time in Italy and London, where the couple had also met with the modern short story writer Catherine Mansfield and the Welsh poet W.H. Davies. While in London, he had also met modernist poets Ezra Pound and T.S. Eliot, the names of which you must have heard. He was mistakenly charged of being a spy during wartime, and this had proved to be a difficult phase for the writer. Further, it had also led him to take voluntary exile from England, which is why the couple had travelled across countries right from Italy to France, Sicily to Germany, Austria to Australia, and Mexico to Sri Lanka. Also, these travels had enriched his literary narratives to a great extent. Despite the financial difficulties and socio-political challenges in the journey of his life and career, Lawrence continued to write and publish his best works. This brings us to the works of DH Lawrence. Some of the best works of fiction by Lawrence are namely The White Peacock, The Trespasser, Sons and Lovers, The Rainbow, Woman in Love, The Lost Girl, Aaron's Rod, Kangaroo, The Boy in the Bush, The Plumed Serpent, Lady Chatterley's Lover, and The Escaped Cock. The anthologies of poetry are titled Love Poems and Others, Amores, Look, We Have Come Through, New Poems, Boy, A Book of Poems, Tortoises, Birds, Beasts and Flowers, Pansies and Nettles. A few of the widely read short stories of Lawrence are The Captain's Doll, The Fox, The Ladybird, and Odor of Chrysanthemums, to name a few. His travels across continents are well documented in his travel narratives, such as Twilight in Italy and Other Essays, Sea and Sardinia, Mornings in Mexico and Other Essays, and Sketches of Etruscan Places and Other Italian Essays. This brings us to questions to check your progress, starting with question number 1. Who was D.H. Lawrence? Question number 2. Where was D.H. Lawrence raised or brought up? Question number 3. What was the role of D.H. Lawrence's mother in his formative or early years? Question number 4. Name the 2 modernist poets whom Lawrence had met in London during his travels. Question number 5. Name a few of the best works of fiction by D.H. Lawrence. Here are the references. I hope you'd go through the BA English Graduate Self-Learning Material, that is the SLM of General English, Block 1, Unit 6, Semester 1. Thank you, dear learners. Hello dear learners, welcome to today's program. I am Dr. Pallavi Gogoi of Krishnakanta Handike State Open University. Today I shall take up Unit 6 titled DH Lawrence, and the poem prescribed is titled Snake. We shall discuss the explanation of the poem Snake in this particular video. The unit is taken from the course General English, Semester 1, Block 1. So let us quickly begin. First, I shall start with a table of contents where we shall discuss the learning objectives, followed by the explanation of the poem and questions to check your progress and their references. Coming to our learning objectives. After going through this unit, the learner will be able to explain the summary of the poem Snake and describe the poet's thoughts and reflections. Coming to the explanation of the poem, I'm sure you must have gone through the poem once. So the poem Snake was first published in the collection entitled Birds, Beasts and Flowers in the year 1923, which was written in Sicily. In the opening line of the poem, the first image that we receive is that of a snake as observed by the narrator at a close distance. The snake, in its natural thirst for water on a burning hot day, takes a drink at the water trough. You may perhaps imagine a snake relieving its thirst under the shade of a tree well before anyone would approach a water trough. Thus, the narrator is taken by surprise at the unexpected sight and stands at a safe distance, waiting and watching the snake under the shade of a strange scented, quote-unquote, strange scented carob tree. Here the snake is seen to enjoy its right of being the first at the water trough and keeping a person on hold while it completes its share of drink. The narrator waits with a pitcher and speculates on how the yellowish-brown snake must have crawled out from the crack in a mud wall. And the narrator wonders how it had slithered to the edge of the stone trough on its soft underbelly, resting its throat on the trough for a drink of water. The trough described in the poem is probably made up of stone and cement, which acts like a storage of water from the taps. The snake rests its throat on the stone bottom to sip the water softly, without a second, to relieve its thirst. The narrator almost immediately personifies the snake with the use of the term someone, quote-unquote someone, who reaches the trough a little earlier than the quote-unquote second comer, who has to wait for his turn. While the snake went about its normal activity without being disturbed or causing any form of disturbance, the narrator's mind became preoccupied with thoughts of disturbing the snake from its place. Thus one can easily note the difference of the snake, which held a calm composure, and the narrator who had unknowingly turned into a potential danger. The poet then reasons that, unlike the harmless black snakes in Italy, the golden ones were venomous, which only justified killing it. The narrator's natural instincts directed him to act rationally and kill the snake. However, the narrator also admits how he had a liking for the silent guest who had quietly taken a drink from his trough and left peacefully after satisfying its thirst. This, the narrator felt, was his rational mind and his education that had unconsciously trained his mind to do so. The narrator tries to examine his mind to search for the reasons that had stopped him from killing the snake. He questions himself on whether it is his lack of courage or whether it was his fascination of the snake. Whatever the reasons were, the narrator reiterates that he had somehow felt honored to have had the chance of being hospitable to a visiting guest. However, the voices in his head did not allow him to be at peace, which is why he had to assure himself that it was not his sense of fear that had stopped him from taking an action. Yet another reiterated description of the snake shows how the mind of the narrator is absolutely captivated by the image of the snake. The narrator then observes how the snake takes a momentary glance at the surrounding area and turns its length slowly towards the direction of the mud wall. The fact that the snake withdrew to its retreat and turned its back on him made the narrator angry, leading him to pick up a piece of log and hurl it towards the water trough. But just as it had entered the hole, the narrator felt a strong urge of protesting the snake's ungrateful departure. But it really wasn't so. It was just a perception of the narrator. This was in a bid to scare and make the snake realize what it had done. But the snake was not even aware of it. The snake swiftly made its way and disappeared into the mouth of the crack in the wall. Strangely enough, even the sight of the snake, in fear of its life, continued to fascinate the narrator on that hot summer noon, but his feelings were not without a sense of regret. This made him dislike not just his own actions, but the modes of education that had molded his thoughts and behavior. So this brings us to the end of the unit. Here we shall discuss the questions to check your progress. Starting with question number 1, name the anthology in which the poem Snake was published. Question number 2, where does the narrator find the snake? Question number 3, what does the snake do near the water trough? Question number 4, what according to the narrator had led him to react towards the snake? Question number 5, why does the narrator experience a sense of regret? Here are the references. I hope you would go through BA English Graduate Self-Learning Material, that is the SLM of General English, Block 1, Unit 6, Semester 1. Thank you, dear learners. Hello, dear learners. Welcome to today's program. I'm Dr. Pallavi Gogoi of Krishnakanta Handike State Open University. Today I shall take up Unit 6, titled DH Lawrence, and the poem prescribed is Snake. In this video, we shall discuss the major themes and the style and language employed in this particular poem. The name of the course is General English, Semester 1, Block 1. So let us quickly begin. First, I shall begin with a table of contents where we shall discuss the learning objectives, followed by the major themes, style and language. Let us sum up, questions to check your progress, followed by the references. So let us begin. Starting with the learning objectives, after going through this third and final video of Unit 6, the learner will be able to explore the relevant themes pertaining to the poem, grasp the style and language employed in the poem, appreciate the core message contained in the poem. Coming to the major themes. The snake is one of the major themes. in this particular poem. The central image in the poem is that of a snake which is gentle and means no harm to the narrator. In fact, the snake continues its normal activity of drinking from the water trough even as it realizes that the narrator is present. Initially, the snake does not sense any form of danger that it may have to confront, but in a few minutes, it turns out that the narrator becomes a potential danger and almost a threat to its life. The snake in the poem is like a gentle person who, quote-unquote, softly and, quote-unquote, silently. Notice the words, softly and silently used for the snake. The snake drinks its fill without disturbing anyone or causing any form of trouble. Although golden snakes in Sicily are considered as venomous, this earth-born snake crawls away in fear even when it is provoked. The snake has a silent presence in the poem until it is compelled to hurriedly escape like a lightning to its own safety. Moreover, it appears to be jolted from its dreamlike state to its sense of reality. The snake's natural instinct is awakened the moment the narrator hurls an attack. But the most important point is that the snake is innocent and means no harm even when it faces trouble. Snakes are widely seen as creepy and unpredictable beings, but the truth is they are more shy and self-defensive by nature. While many people regard snakes as unwanted creatures, there are many cultures across the world that worship snakes. For instance, in Indian culture, snakes are worshipped on auspicious occasions such as Nag Panchami or Shivratri. The poet too compares the snake to a quote-unquote god and to a quote-unquote king in exile or a quote-unquote king of the underworld. So these are the words used for comparison. God, king in exile, king of the underworld, that maintains its sense of composure and gravity even in the face of danger. The next theme that is evident in the poem is man and education. When the narrator first notices the snake, he feels a sense of honor and amazement to unexpectedly find a visiting guest. Thus, the initial response of the narrator is that of a hospitable reception, but it is his voice of education, quote-unquote voice of education, that comes in the way and causes him to switch his thoughts and actions. The rational or practical voice in his head led him to consider killing the snake as golden snakes were considered venomous. Moreover, his ego challenged him to get rid of the snake all at once without being swayed by his emotions. But the truth was that the narrator liked the snake in its grace and innocence as well. So you see the mixed feelings that the narrator has towards the snake. Thus the narrator questions himself on whether it was cowardice that gave him a sense of fear and whether it was his perversity to talk to the snake up close or humility to have changed his thoughts of killing it for once and for all. Yet the voices in his head did not stop telling him that if you were not afraid, you would not kill him. So we are not sure if the snake is really killed or not. But however, the poem brings up the question about the narrator's own stance and response or reaction towards the innocent creature as the snake. We are trained or educated to be practical in all situations right from our school days. And when the mind is molded in a practical way, it is difficult to unlearn all that has been coded in our thought processes, isn't it? Also, the narrator finds that it is difficult to justify one's actions, and sometimes we simply end up doing things that reflect how our brains are wired in a unique way. Even after having regretted his own actions for almost having hurt the snake, the narrator watches the snake in quote-unquote fascination, as though it were some kind of experiment. Then again, it is the voice of education that makes him realize that his actions were quote-unquote petty and quote-unquote vulgar. So these are the words that are being used, petty and vulgar, that he had to expiate for. Coming to the style and language of the poem, the first image that strikes the reader is that of a snake at a water trough on a hot day. Throughout the poem, the charming presence of the snake is seen to fascinate the mind of the narrator, who almost readily personifies the snake and refers to the snake as quote-unquote he. For instance, the poet writes, quote-unquote, he was at the trough before me. Or elsewhere he writes, quote-unquote, he reached down from a fissure. Or he even writes, quote-unquote, he sipped with his straight mouth. And even goes on to write something like, quote-unquote, someone was before me. So you see how the snake is being personified. The learner may take note of the narrator's self-assertion with the use of his I, my, for an instance, quote unquote, and I like a second comer waiting, or my water throw, or my wall face, or even my snake, to cite just a few examples from the poem. After reading the poem, you'll get a better idea of what I'm talking about. The poem contains 74 lines written in free verse with the use of repetition, similes, metaphors, and onomatopoeia. You may note that the narrator emphasizes his description of the snake's presence together with his own response through the use of repetitive phrases. Some of the examples are given here, as you may note, and also the poet makes use of similes. Through the use of similes, the thirsty snake is compared to quote-unquote drinking cattle. The satiated snake is compared to that of quote-unquote one who has drunken. The sacred snake is compared to lightning. The grandeur of the snake is compared to that of a king in exile, quote-unquote king in exile, as well as to that of quote-unquote God. Altogether, the powerful presence of the snake and the muddled thoughts of the narrator are well presented in the words and images of the poem. The snake, in its measure of soft, silent, and snake-easing, quote-unquote snake-easing movements, literally stirs the reader's imagination through the description of a narrator who tries to capture this moment of one particular day. So let us finally sum up this unit in this third and final video. After having gone through this unit, you will be able to discuss the life and works of the poet DH Lawrence. A thorough reading of the unit will also enable you to further explain the content, context, and the relevant themes pertaining to the text of the poem Snake. Also, you will be able to grasp the poetic techniques employed in the prescribed poem as we have just discussed. The study of the unit should enable you to explore and enrich your knowledge on the other interesting works by the poet. This brings us to the questions to check your progress, starting with question number 1. Describe the central image in the poem Snake in a few words. Question number 2. What is the difference between earth bronze snake and the golden snakes of Sicily? Question number 3. What does the poet compare the snake with? Question number 4. What is the major factor that tends to mold our minds in a particular way as also reflected in the poem Snake? Question number 5. Mention any two similes found in the poem Snake. This brings us to the references. I hope you'd also refer to the BA English Graduate Self-Learning Material, that is the SLM, of General English Block 1, Semester 1, Unit 6. All the best and thank you, dear learners.
ইমান সময় আমি স্বয়ং প্ৰভা DTH চেনেল 20 যোগে সম্প্ৰচাৰিত কৃষ্ণকান্ত সন্দিকৈ ৰাজ্যিক মুক্ত বিশ্ববিদ্যালয়ৰ বিদ্যায়তনিক অনুষ্ঠানটিৰ আজিৰ খণ্ডটি উপভোগ কৰিলো। এই বিদ্যায়তনিক অনুষ্ঠানটিৰ জৰিয়তে শিক্ষাৰ্থীসকল নিশ্চয়কৈ ভালেখিনি উপকৃত হৈছে। পুনৰ আন এটি বিষয় লৈ আমি আপোনালোকৰ মাজলৈ আহিম। নমস্কাৰ।